Hello everyone, welcome to MojoTalks, and this is WatchClub, the show where we break down the biggest shows on television. I'm your host, Matt, and Phoebe is with me as always. Phoebe, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Very good. So we're going to talk about Westworld, Season 2, Episode 6, which was titled Face Space, which was written by Carly Rae and directed by Tariq Saleh. So let's go ahead and talk about our favorite moments. I know we were fighting backstage over who would talk about it. Well, let's just both talk about it. There are no rules here. The samurai sword fight.
That was so crazy.
Insane.
It was so crazy. I found that this was like one of the most gory episodes of the season.
Yeah.
I noticed that it's been like progressively getting like gorier and gorier, which is definitely not a bad thing. I like it.
Yeah.
I think it's cool.
We're freaks that way.
Yeah,
we just want to see as much blood.
It's very stylish, I find. And this episode in particular, when we sort of open on Shogun World, and you know, there's all these decapitated samurai all over the the floor. It was just like so crazy.
Yeah,
it was so crazy.
It's funny you mention that because the episode before last night was like super violent too. So they're upping the ante is what I meant to say. So that's pretty crazy. I loved the scene. Again, it's gonna sound horrible, but when he cuts his hand off, and it's just like such a clean cut, and
I
there's
had to
blood
look away
everywhere.
from that. It was just too much for
The
me.
whole scene, I was just like, oh, here we go. It was awesome. But yeah, pretty brutal. But I also liked how Maeve didn't interfere.
Yeah,
you know, when Akane was like, oh, you have to save him, and she was like, well, no, we all get to choose our destiny, or whatever the line was exactly.
I think that just goes to show that, because we've seen a lot of Dolores being this like ruthless killer up until this point, and we're also seeing Maeve tapping into these new qualities that she has with her mind control and everything. And it just goes to show that even though she has all of this power, and as of yet I think she's like the most powerful character in the series, like in my opinion, she still has the ability to sort of see right from wrong, and she's not using her abilities for selfish purposes.
Exactly.
And the guy asked her not to, so that was pretty cool. It was pretty honorable of him.
いや、俺ら皆運命を選べる。それが死であろうと。
There was actually a really cool moment in the scene where he, is defeating this guy and he cuts off his hand, and he takes his small knife and puts it in front of him. So that's actually called harikiri, which is Japanese ritual suicide by disembowelment. So basically he gave this guy the opportunity to like kill himself before he decapitated him, to regain honor for himself and his family. So I thought that was really cool, like an ode to this, Japanese ritual that's been going on for like millennia. That was really an interesting thing. And it also just goes to show that character is so honorable. He gives him the opportunity to do that, and then when he sees that the guy obviously would like be suffering and dying, he decapitates him. So he kind of like ends his suffering there, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah. And like Maeve was about to jump in, and then he comes in. He's just like, no, I want to do the honorable thing. So yeah, I totally agree. Another one of my favorite moments was when Elsie and Bernard go down into the bunker, which they call the cradle.
The cradle.
So that is basically like, that's probably the most important part of that whole episode, because later on we find out that, well, it's not explicitly said, but I think we can all kind of surmise that with Bernard having all these flashbacks at all the different labs in the previous episodes, he's like, oh, I remember being here. Oh, I remember grabbing this ball here and that and this. So I think it's kind of fair to surmise that Bernard has been at these labs, and Ford kind of programmed into him, was like, oh, this is what you're gonna do. So that ball kind of represents Ford's mind. He had him pick it up at the first lab, bringing it through all these different labs, and then finally implanting Ford's mind into Cradle, which, as we know, kind of stores all the storylines of Westworld.
Yeah.
So that's why the storylines are all out of whack. So you mentioned that Maeve is the most powerful character on the show.
Okay.
I don't want to say anything because we're going to talk about it later, but she might not be. There are two kind of struggles, I would say.
Fair enough. I don't know if you noticed this earlier in the episode, I think, than the cradle part, when we're first introduced to this new Teddy, which we were going to talk about a lot because this is pretty crazy. There's a really cool part in the scene where we're at, we're in Westworld and we're at that iconic sort of starter scene for all of the narratives. and there's the iconic milk can that we talk about in almost every episode.
Yep.
And Teddy goes just behind it and he picks up a bullet.
Yeah.
So I think that that's like, it's a pretty obvious testament to the way that he's changed since Dolores like reset his sensibilities. But it's pretty scary. Like Teddy is like ruthless, and I didn't know whether or not that he would continue to be in the show or in the main story. I'm really glad that he is. I
Yeah.
think that Dolores is going to regret doing this though, because he
Yeah.
seems like really, really crazy when he just like point blank shoots the guy because he's not giving
Oh
up
my
any
God.
information.
Yeah.
I was so shocked because it's just so not like him.
Yeah.
And that was just crazy to me. It was so insane.
Even when Dolores talks to him now, she doesn't talk the same way. It's almost like she's happy at first that he's so different, but it almost seems that she's kind of like walking on eggshells too. It's like
Yeah.
she doesn't know exactly how he's gonna react when she says certain things, or how he's gonna, she was super surprised when he blew that guy's brains out.
Yeah,
so,
I think that
yeah.
we all were. It was like so crazy, and like I said before, I think Dolores didn't really anticipate how it would change the dynamic of the group, and like in turn the revolution that this character who sort of served to ground her and just like stop her from doing all of these crazy things and remind her like there are more important things. He is just unhinged now. So there's
Yeah.
like she's like, oh no, who will ground me?
Yeah.
it's gonna be crazy, I think.
It does look like it might come back and bite her for sure.
Yeah.
The man who rode that train was built weak and born to fail. You fixed him. Now forget about it.
So there was the scene at the very beginning of the episode when Dolores and Bernard are having their quintessential conversation, as we've always seen in the past. Two chairs, they're talking about life and, big discussions like usual. So usually it's Bernard who's in charge of these conversations, but then in this particular one, he seemed to be questioning himself and his motives a bit more, and he asks one question to himself, and then Dolores was like, he didn't say that. And you're like, wait, what do you mean he didn't say that? And then you start to realize that it's not Bernard questioning Dolores, but rather Dolores questioning Bernard.
Is this some kind of improvisation?
Freeze all motor functions.
Whoa.
And because you notice this too, but the aspect ratio thing, very different. So then we're starting to think, oh, this might have taken place beforehand. You're not exactly sure when the timeline is, right? But I think what it means is that maybe it's not Bernard, and it was actually like a clone of Bernard, which would make sense as to why Dolores is questioning him in that matter. And what the audience might have missed in this one was in the episode The Riddle of the Sphinx, William was, of course, doing these experiments on Mr. Delos Sr., his father-in-law. And it was the same kind of thing because they mention fidelity.
Like I said, they're just trying to establish a baseline. For what? Fidelity.
So what's the idea? That afterwards you and I have the exact same conversation? It seems a little far-fetched, doesn't it, William?
So when William's questioning him, he's like, oh, we're doing this like for the 50th time because we're testing fidelity. We want to make sure that you're like a good robot. So, and Dolores mentions the word fidelity as well when he's talking to, we'll say, Bernard. So it was interesting, that same word was used, and just that whole kind of experiment thing kind of blended and meshed themselves together in this one.
That's really cool. It
Yeah.
makes me think of an episode earlier in the season where we see Dolores in the outside world with Arnold, and he's sort of gauging whether or not she's ready to attend this, showing of what
Right.
Westworld could be.
Yeah.
And she keeps saying the same thing over and over again, and he's sort of like, dang, like she's not ready, whatever.
Yeah.
And now the tables have sort of turned, and
Yeah.
she's seeming like she's in charge, and she's vetting whether or not he's ready.
Yeah.
Ready for what? We don't know. And like you said, the aspect ratio is always different when we come to these scenes, so we don't really know when in the timeline this is happening.
Yeah.
As is always with Westworld, we don't really know. It's all sort of jumbled up.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to see whether or not this was happening before or after. If it was happening before, then how long has Dolores been planning this revolution?
That's the thing.
Because if you notice, she's actually wearing her dress that she wears in the first season when she's like this goody girl and she's
Exactly.
not yet tapped into her Wyatt sensibility.
Yeah.
So like, was she pretending? Is she, has she been planning this for a long time? I guess we won't know. I think a lot of people online are calling to the fact that Bernard is possibly several people.
Yes.
Which would be pretty sick.
It would be pretty crazy.
I think that would be pretty crazy. I have a little bit of a crazy what you miss. And
Perfect. We love crazy here.
Bear with me because I was sort of strapped for this one because I don't know. I feel like a lot of the references were like pretty obvious. We don't want to talk down to our audience, obviously.
Right.
But there was a moment. Bear with me. At the end of the episode,
I'm so excited for this. Where are we going?
When Maeve finally sees her daughter again for the first time, and she realizes that her daughter is no longer really her daughter. She's sort of her daughter, if you will. She's the daughter of someone else. And she's playing with these two dolls, and she alludes to the fact that there is a bad man present in her storyline. And bear with me, in Stranger Things, which is also another one of my favorite shows, we know that Eleven, who has telekinetic powers, like Maeve, she always refers to this, this ominous bad man. So I wonder if maybe it's a nod to that show or if maybe it's just a coincidence. However, I do have reason to believe that Maeve's daughter will also have telekinetic powers, and I think that it's just like a very funny coincidence that these two characters are, like young children who've been separated from their families, and they sort of don't really know what's going on. They're special, but they don't know how they're special. So I think that maybe she could also have telekinetic abilities.
Wow.
I don't know.
That's a very interesting parallel. I will say
see.
that it's very unique. I don't think many people thought of that initially or share that. But hey, you've given our audience something to ponder here. That's pretty interesting.
I don't know. We'll see.
Are you out of your mind? Just listen to me. You are out of your mind.
Another what you missed that I think the audience didn't kind of catch on to was at the very end when Bernard goes into Cradle to kind of see what exactly is happening. He sees, like you mentioned before, it's a classic. He steps off the train. It's the exact same fun-loving intro that we've seen in season 1. But then there's a little something different where a greyhound is just running down the dirt road, and Bernard looks and he's like, this isn't part of the storyline. And then he goes into the Mariposa, and of course, it was the big reveal of the episode. Ford is there at the player piano saying like, how's it going, my old friend? So what I don't think the audience caught on to was that greyhound was a little ode to the first season when Ford was talking and he was saying, oh, as a kid, I had a greyhound. We always wanted a dog, my brother and I, and our family finally got us a greyhound. And it was very interesting because this greyhound, all its life was just run in circles all the time, chasing this little bunny. And it was kind of like, it's kind of like similar to how the hosts live their life, It's just a constant loop. They just live their storylines and that's it, nothing else. But now that Ford is in the cradle, controlling all these storylines, pulling them all out of whack, it's kind of symbolic that, what? Things are out of control now, but I'm in complete control of that.
Hello, old friend.
So a few weeks ago, we had our lovely coworker Rebecca come on the show, and she had some very, very interesting, groundbreaking predictions.
She did. I think she blew some people's minds with some of those.
Yeah, when I watched it, I was like, whoa, like crazy. But now, well, let's just remind our viewers that Rebecca had predicted that the Man in Black is actually a host. Which, we were like, no way, that would be crazy. In this episode, I think that there was maybe a little hint that is actually going to be true. So picture this. The Man in Black is sitting around a fire with his daughter. He hasn't seen her in years. She's trying to get him to come back.
Yeah.
And she's explaining to him that she's been, visiting the different parks, and she was in her favorite park, which was the park that we first met her in, which seemed like sort of like an India world.
Yeah.
And he says to her, oh, you were always terrified of the elephants.
I remember. You were terrified of the elephants.
I loved the elephants. They scared the shit out of Mom.
It looked like he glitched almost.
Yes.
He was sort of like,
I thought the same thing.
It was so creepy, and like it was almost as if he like said the wrong thing, and like when a host sort of says the wrong thing, they glitch a little bit.
Yeah.
It was really, really creepy, and I think that might be a little hint of what's to come for his character.
Yeah, I thought the exact same thing. I mean, it also does make sense that he would have that reaction just because of the whole trauma of the way his wife died. But I did think it was like very robotic too. It reminded me of like Abernathy kind of like losing it
Yeah.
at points, and I was like, that's very subtle, but that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my predictions, I can't claim it as my own, but I think it's kind of a popular one. But there's so many hints and kind of like allusions to it that I think it's definitely going to happen. So I think that Dolores is pregnant.
What?
I think she's pregnant. And I know what you guys are thinking. She's a robot. She can't be pregnant. But there have been interviews with Lisa Joy, the co-creator, and she has said, basically, you know, these robots are exactly the same as humans. They're flesh, they're bone, they have everything humans do. The only difference, the only thing that separates us, or us from them, is a real brain and that computer brain. So from that interview, we could be led to believe that they have functioning organs the same ways that humans do. And also, why would the show pay so much attention to Teddy and Dolores' sex scene?
Yeah, that was like, it was really emphasized,
Yeah.
it felt like. It
Like,
was,
I know the whole point of Westworld is to go kill people and have sex with robots, but they didn't show too much of the sex part, which is why when they did linger so long on that sex scene, I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
Why would they do that? So I think they lingered on that to kind of hint at the fact that, oh, look, they can have, you know, emotions for each other, they can have sexual relations, and it could ultimately lead to childbirth.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, if that is the case, then Dolores will sorely regret changing Teddy
Well, that's the thing.
into
And-
this monster.
And I think that could happen because, well, I think that the pregnancy thing could happen because that just adds like a whole nother level of drama to their already kind of frayed relationship at this point.
Yeah.
Or what we could also, or what we could assume will become frayed because, like you said, he's balls to the walls Teddy now. Yeah.
I did actually notice in the episode, now that I'm thinking about it, every time that he would do something sort of crazy, you could see like this like tinge of like hurt in her eyes, or like
Yes.
this tinge of sadness. So like it would, you know, I think that she's realizing that he's not the person that she loved before, or that she cared about before, and it's just a symptom of what's to come.
Yeah, no,
for
totally.
for their baby.
Yeah, that's
That
it.
would be so crazy.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are some pretty killer predictions. There was also a pretty killer HBO Netflix Stranger Things reference. We don't know if that's 100% confirmed, but we'll see. So let's wrap the show up there, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to keep watching Westworld recaps, then please subscribe to MojoTalks for more. And of course, MojoTalks, there's also the Cinephiles Extended Cut, which Phoebe and I are on. That airs every Friday. So for myself and Phoebe, guys, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.